Hello everyone, welcome to this first week's roundup for the MOOC Jane Austen, Myth, Reality and Global Celebrity. I'm Amy Clarke, one of the mentors for this course you might have seen commenting.
And I'm Alison Daniell, and I've just had the best time on this course. The comments that have been made, the insights have been absolutely fascinating, and I think that we've all really enjoyed getting to grips with Jane Austen in so many different guises.
And we were both saying it's been fascinating actually what a broad spread of comments we've had, and people that are doing PhDs or have taught on Jane Austen before, right through to people who are actually quite new to Jane Austen, who are really benefiting from this community discussion and learning from each other as much as we're learning from the course.
Absolutely, but everybody's got so much to bring to the course, and people have been bringing such a diversity of opinions and insights to the course that it's been fascinating for us too, as mentors, to be learning from you and from learning from your own expertise.
And from learning about what you find most fascinating, or the areas that you maybe don't know as much about but that we maybe take for granted, or things that we might have overlooked that are really, really fascinating and that we hadn't picked up as much.
Absolutely. There's a number of really good threads that have been running on the course this week. I'm thinking particularly, Amy, of the thread on education. There's been some really good comments coming up. There's been lots of discussion. There's been lots of points of view, and also importantly some really good analysis of the text and the source materials that have been placed on the course. And we've also been discussing the publishing industry and how that operated, and women's novels and women as readers, women as writers, and that's been a very fruitful area of discussion as well.
Yeah, just really forwarding the context of the whole, how Jane Austen was published, how her novels were initially received, and how they've continued to be received, through the Victorian era and even up to today, and how they've been repackaged within that context.
Yeah, I think if we just focus on education perhaps, just for a short while. I think the big question that's been coming out of the threads for me has been, what was an education for? Was it purely an academic exercise? Was it filling your brain with information? Or was it more the education of the whole person, which is something that perhaps we don't think of in the 21st century as being part of the education process, but was probably part of the developmental and educational ideals back in the 18th century.
I think very much today, whenever we think of education, we're so focused on a kind of a career aspect afterwards, and it's very important to focus on, for women in particular, they had, depending on which class you were a part of, or how well educated your parents were, or what your aspirations were, your education played a big part in the possibilities that you could have in the future. But it wasn't necessarily for for a trade or for anything like we would consider to be a job. It's education as a very rounded thing, which is why it's music, it's languages, it's the accomplishments that actually matter more than necessarily standard knowledge.
Absolutely. One of the comments that I chose to pin in this section was one from Julie Buck, who said Austen seems to be encouraging women to have a really rich interior life. And I thought that this was a really important and very insightful comment that fed into the idea of what education is for. And it made me think about Mary Wollstonecraft. And The Vindication of the Rights of Women is a text that people generally think is sort of quite a pro-feminist philosophical text, but it's actually to do with education, and particularly the education of girls. And Wollstonecraft, and I think this has particular resonance when we're thinking about Austen, Wollstonecraft says in The Vindication of the Rights of Women, a proper education, or to speak with more precision, a well-stored mind, would enable a woman to support a single life with dignity. And that feeds exactly into Julie's comment, whereby we're thinking of education as something which can enrich the individual and give the individual that rich and varied interior life that will then enable them to get through the difficulties of their life going forward,
and help them contribute to sort of society or to their family unit or to their friends by improving themselves as an individual. So you really get that push of kind of focus on the individual and focus on self-improvement as a means of improving community as a whole, and you have your own active part in that. rather than it being a passive community focus.
Yes, absolutely. And Wollstonecraft is very, very keen on looking at the development of children and getting children to regulate what she calls their passions, so that children conform to behaviours that are set up by society, but more than that, they are able to conduct themselves and to regulate themselves, and very importantly, they are able to develop their reasoning and rationale so that they can think for themselves. And this, for an 18th century educationalist, is really important. The idea of reason and being able to think calmly and intellectually about life, not just about academic subjects, and that comes out very strongly in Jane Austen's novels. All of her heroines are the ones who are able to reflect, who are able to regulate their passions, who are able then to address the problems that life gives them in a calm and collected way.
Which comes out so clearly in Sense and Sensibility with Marianne, where her whole transformation after she's become really unwell is all about the regulation of her passions, and at the end of the novel she's so much more sedate and more regulated, which is completely in play with that. You need to take responsibility for yourself, reflect on your own actions, and from that you lead a more fruitful life.
Yes. And I think, Amy, you've been looking particularly at boys' education, whereas perhaps I've been looking more at the education of girls and women. You've had some insights about how boys were educated.
Yeah, there's been a really good thread actually that a lot of people were discussing on. It's pinned at the top of one of the sections about female education by the first comments, Jennifer Slade, and lots of people brought out really fantastic quotes and interpretations of the way that men's education is represented in the novels, and through that sort of came to an analysis that Austen's actually really focusing the role of the individual in your education, that being formally educated isn't enough in itself. The individual has a responsibility to take in that education, to learn from it, and to take on their opportunities. It's not a passive thing, it's a very active thing. But it was very much picked up that obviously the main focus is on female education rather than in men's education.
Another really interesting thread that's come up has been the importance of reading in Austen's novels and the role that books played in her life, and also the role in which the publishing industry and books generally played in the social construction of 18th century life.
And you pinned a fantastic thread on that, which was started by Grisabella, which is talking very much about the publishing practices that were behind Austen's whole career, really, and the way that manuscripts were handled, which is something that we don't necessarily think of so much today. We're so entrenched in the idea of the author and the manuscript being sacred that we haven't necessarily considered in our own approaches how the manuscript is just a practical thing, and once it's been used or heavily annotated, its worth is sort of gone for the people that are using it.
Yes. I mean, it may have been that Austen saw the final printed version of her books as their zenith, that they couldn't get any better, so she felt she didn't need to keep the manuscripts.
Well, sort of seeing them as her children that have been set free into the world, so she didn't
need
the earlier versions.
To keep it. But on the other hand, we don't know. Maybe they were in the pile of papers that Cassandra destroyed. We just don't know. Gabriella Parisi quoted one of my favourite all-time quotes from Austen, from Northanger Abbey, where Austen, the narrator, is talking about novels in general, and she says, "It is only Cecilia or Camilla or Belinda, or in short, only some work where the greatest powers of the mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humour are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language." So I found this particularly interesting because Northanger Abbey is a text where the tensions about novel writing and the reception of the novel within 18th century society are particularly acute. So there is that defence of the novel that I've just read, and particularly all the novels mentioned are novels written by women. So a particular defence of the female authored novel, whereas the storyline of Northanger Abbey obviously includes what can happen if you allow novel writing to either take over your life or you believe that fiction is reality.
Once again, you've got that regulation of you can educate yourself and enjoy reading different texts, but you need to self-reflect. You need to make sure that you're moderating your responses to these with common sense and with practicality.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's a really nice point of debate that's been coming up in the threads as to whether people think that Jane Austen's more in favour of the regulation or whether she's more in favour of the novel. And it's something that if you go onto the thread, it would be fantastic to have some more views and have some more input into that really lively debate that's going on.
Yeah, which would be brilliant. I've particularly enjoyed sort of the second half of this week's content, which I don't think so many people have got through to yet, because there's a lot of stuff for you to get through, which talks more about the biographies of Jane Austen and the portraits, so the different ways in which her image or her brand, if you like, have been repackaged. And I'm really enjoying that because my speciality is 18th century celebrity, and this all, you know, plays into those kind of discussions about how people are represented or how they would like themselves to be represented. I've pinned a couple of comments, and there was one by Paul Morley which was fantastic, that really engages with this idea of celebrity and with this idea of branding, and you know what the purpose is behind different brands, what the purpose is behind, you know, why you would want yourself to be represented in a particular way, why Jane Austen wasn't so keen on having her image represented, and why her relations wanted very much to focus in the biographies with her as religious, as, you know, very domestic, rather than highlighting those elements of her character which may have seemed a little bit more controversial, or some of the comments in the letters that were struck out where she's, you know, saying some quite not necessarily respectful things about her family or about different people in the community. And so it's very interesting to think about why those were struck out and why those were removed. And the same sort of thing was mentioned with Sharon Campbell in the section on portraits of Jane Austen, where she was talking about the reasons why the portraits have very different appearances. So I, again, have really enjoyed having a conversation with other people about that, about Victorian ideals in some of the portraits. So that reconstruction of Cassandra's portrait, where, you know, in the one by Cassandra, she looks quite a bit grumpy, really. She's, you know, she's sort of got her arms crossed. She looks like she's really concentrating. The Victorian representation, she looks like, what you said earlier, she looks a bit like a cow.
It's a bit of a cow portrait. She has these very big bovine eyes, and she looks very... She's been softened, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. Which Sharon Campbell picks up as being to do with the Victorian ideal of femininity. So it's very important to think about why we might relate to particular portraits or particular representations, and what that says about our culture, because that's all to do with, that's why celebrity works, is that they're an image that can be recreated and shifts continually to fulfill different cultural ideals or different cultural desires.
And I think off the back of that one of the reasons why Austen has such an enduring popularity, in fact a global popularity, is that rather like Shakespeare's plays, they can be reread and reinterpreted. There is the love story, central plot line, but beyond that, different generations bring different interpretations and highlight different aspects of the novels.
And that's been brought up in the discussions of the biographies, in terms of people bring different understandings to her life.
Yes.
You know, there's been, well, like the Woolf comment says, Virginia Woolf's comment says earlier, she's defended as, you know, Aunt Jane, and as this complete image of perfection that is a very pastoral image. And then in sort of more modern interpretations, we're seeing her a lot more as a proto-feminist, or, you know, being involved in those kind of debates, being very intellectually motivated. So it, again, she's a very shifting figure, and it allows us to interpret her in multiple different ways.
Which is endlessly fascinating and feeds into and makes a lot of really good discussion and comments.
And people have been coming up on all sorts of different sides of this debate. So to do with the portraits, you have people that have an incredibly emotive response to certain ones, or, you know, whether that's for or against, and a lot of people that don't want to know. They don't want to know anything about, they don't want to know what she looks like, and they don't see the relevance in knowing what she looked like, or knowing facts about her life, because they want to view her as the work.
Yes.
And the work as the most important thing.
Which is actually a crucial point of debate within literature studies generally.
Absolutely.
Do you need to know about the author and the author's background
and
in order to understand the text?
How much you should read the author's life or the author's background into the text. Because this is a real debate, I think, particularly with women's writing, that women's lives tend to be read into their novels, rather than viewing, or into any other intellectual work, rather than viewing it as a work of their own genius, it does tend to be seen a lot more as reflective, or as seen stolen from their own life.
Yes.
Which robs quite a lot of the creativity or the intellectual ability of the woman, the woman creator.
And if I can just offer up again the contrast of Shakespeare, and we know very, very, very little about Shakespeare's life. There is very little in the way of factual information about him, but yet he is this towering figure within literature, and nobody thinks that we need to know his background in order to interpret his works.
Yeah.
But like Austen, his works are interpreted afresh for each generation, and I think perhaps if we fixate too much on the biographical aspects, perhaps we miss some of the depth and the possibilities of the texts, but on the other hand, it still adds to our understanding of them.
Yeah, and it adds to our understanding of ourselves, I think, as well, what we view to be important, and the individual pieces that we pick up to be important is as much of worth for us to reflect upon why we find those important. Why are we so drawn to know about the individual's life, even though there's so little evidence? To go back to the Shakespeare example, there's so little evidence. People are still having the debate. People are still desperate to know, and there's still the debate that the Earl of Oxford wrote all the plays. People are still hammering that home.
He was great. He wrote them 4 years after he died. He was still writing Shakespeare's plays.
But you have the same thing with Austen. People are still really desperate to know. They want to know whether she ran away with Tom Lefroy, like as in becoming Jane. Even though we know that's, but there are those different kind of wish fulfillment ideas about the individual's life.
And I think one of the comments that came up on the thread that I read yesterday was the idea that perhaps the novels were a collaboration.
Oh, really?
Which is something that I've not come across before.
I've never I didn't. I'll have to find that that comment up.
Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it is interesting. Those debates hold so much fascination for us as an audience.
Yes. And I'm really looking forward to going into next week and to opening up week 2 of the course, and to be able to engage with the materials and the debates and the insights that are going to come up there.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It should be a fascinating week. We were both saying it's the discussions that people have been having on each other's comments that have really been the most wonderful and the most fruitful part of the course. And I've seen a lot of comments actually that other people at various other points have been having the same questions or having the same debate. So I really would encourage you all to read through the comments and to partake in that debate with one another, because a huge amount of the enjoyment comes from that conversation with each other. So going into next week, we would I think very much emphasise, try and talk to each other about it
absolutely.
as much as you are talking to us.
As moderators, what we're trying to do is we will pin a comment which we think can be broken down or viewed in a number of different ways. We will comment upon it, and then we would really encourage you to read through the thread and get into a dialogue, get into a conversation with each other, and that's when the real learning is going to happen.
And share insights that you have that you may think that others would benefit from.
Yeah,
that
share
haven't
links,
been pulled up.
any books you've read.
Absolutely, links and book recommendations.
That's been great.
Have been fantastic,
People
and I know
a
lot of people have really benefited from those and have really enjoyed that extra material. So please keep doing that. Going on to next week.
Now you're going to have access to the materials on the course for...
It's from 4 weeks from once you've signed up. But obviously there's so much in the course from the links that other people are sharing, and just the material itself. There's so much recommended reading and so many nuggets of information that you can really go back over and over again. So we would really recommend that people upgrade in order to have access to the course, forever.
For longer. You're going to get the more that you can read, and some of the course materials are really, really interesting, and they will bear a rereading and a rethinking about.
Absolutely.
And having access to those materials for a bit longer, and having access to all the comments and the other people on the course, that will help you really get the most that you can out of this course.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you for doing the MOOC, and we will be online next week.
Yeah, we look forward to many more fascinating discussions and conversations with you.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you all online.